Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. Thank you for participation to this seminar. I'm Jun Saito of Japan Center for Economic Research. Today, I'm happy to talk about the book I published in March. The title is Japan and Growth Equity Small Government Impossible Triangle. I know that you wonder what this means, but this is what I'm going to explain from now on. The book looks like this. I'm afraid it has just been published, so it's only available in hardback, and it is also available in ebook. But if you try to purchase hardback, it's going to be very expensive, especially because of the depreciation of the yen. And this was published in an English-British publisher, so I'm sorry for that. But anyway, I think I hope to explain what I wanted to say in this book today to you. This book is based on my experience in the Japanese government, and also I worked briefly for the international organization called the IMF. And also my research done in a number of universities, including Keio University and the ICU, International Christian University, and also in Japan Center for Economic Research, which I am currently affiliated with. I have to say that my talk today will be something somewhat critical and also pessimistic about the Japanese economy. But I hope after this, you would listen to someone more optimistic and neutralize the impact of today's lecture. But I hope that I can provide you with some food for thought and think what could be done to the situation that we face in Japan today. I'm going to start my talk by talking about inequality. I think this is one of the single most important issue that we face in Japan and as well as in other countries. If we don't care much about this, you're going to face a lot of political confusion and a lot of problems. And this is what we already see in the world. I've compared the inequality in Japan with inequality in other OECD economies. You can compare with the developing economies, the emerging economies, but I think it is important to compare with the economies in the similar stage of development so that you can draw more interesting policy implications. Now, this is a figure on Gini coefficient. I hope you're familiar, but if you're not, well, this is an indicator of inequality, which takes the value between 0 and 1. And higher value means higher or larger inequality. The smaller value means that you don't have so much of an inequality. Now, Japan is shown in red. And to compare that, I have shown USA in yellow or orange, and the Nordic economies in green. You can see that in terms of inequality, US has a very large inequality, while the Nordic economy has a very low inequality. Japan is in the middle, a little bit high and close to US, but not so much as US. So my starting point is, Japan has a relatively high inequality, but not so much as in US, and but much worse than the Nordic economies. Now, this is shown in disposable income, meaning that this is after income redistribution, after taxing and transfers. Similar picture you can find if you look at Gini coefficient for market income, which is before income redistribution. Of course, income redistribution brings down the Gini coefficient, so the magnitude is a bit different, but the ranking is very similar, except in the case of market economy. Interesting enough, Finland, will be one of the highest inequality, economies with the highest inequality. All the rest of the Nordic economies are in the lower half, but except Finland, which is very interesting. But Finland is able to bring down the inequality if you look at the disposable income because of the very strong income redistribution. Now, having said that, so why is there a difference in inequality? In other words, why is inequality widening in many of the countries? There's a big discussion in the economics literature, especially in the field of international economics, trade theory, and in the labor economics. But I don't want to go all into that. I kind of summarized what has been in the discussion in the book. But the two main factors behind the widening of inequality is globalization and technological change. I think you can easily understand why that would be the case, because if you're globalized and you have a lot of imports coming in, those competing industries with the imported goods would have to reduce their business, which means that you have to get people out of business. And also, if you have a global or technological change, computerization, automation, or AIs could take away some jobs from the people. Of course, those who lose jobs, if they can move on to the jobs which are produced in the expanding industries, well, that will not be the problem. But usually, it's not that smooth. That transition could not be made so smoothly. And especially with the skill mismatch, okay? You lose jobs, but the growing jobs is in IT industry, for instance. If you're not equipped with IT technique, then you will not be able to get the job, even though there's a vacancy. So that creates losers and winners, and that would lead to wider inequality. Now, the usual understanding is that if we're talking about developed economies, these two are moving or affecting these economies in the same way, same magnitude, because they are developed economies. I call this a universal assumption. You assume that these economies are subject to the similar kind of pressure from globalization and technological change. So the discussion tends to move away from these two factors and talk about the differences in institutional arrangements, like do we have a minimum wage, or how about the labor market, how's the trade union doing, and all that. And also, of course, how about taxation and transfers? Is it enough or not? Okay, it moves on to this kind of a discussion. But one thing that I started to doubt is that does universal assumption apply especially to Japan? Maybe that's not the case. So I go on to talk about the globalization taking place in Japan. I have distinguished between outward globalization and inward globalization. Outward globalization means exporting, making outward foreign direct investment, and sending people abroad. Inward globalization is defined as importing, accepting inward foreign direct investment, and taking immigration. Now, we have been doing, well, we mean Japan. Japan has been doing well in outward globalization, as we all know. Okay? A lot of exports, a lot of outward foreign direct investment. And there's a lot of businessmen in other countries. How about inward globalization? This compares the support of agricultural producers across a number of OECD economies. We don't have enough data, but it shows that we have quite a high support of agricultural producers. Okay. And if you look at the import data, for instance, and also, of course, the arrangements with regards to imports, There's a lot of hurdles to clear if you want to import agricultural products, for instance. So centering on the agricultural product, there is a lot of constraint on importing. How about direct investment? Well, the left-hand side figure shows the outward foreign direct investment. It's in ratios to GDP, but it shows that we are about in the middle, not doing so significantly, but not so bad. Okay, but how about inward foreign direct investment? We are we have the lowest ratio of inward foreign direct investment to GDP among all OECD economies. So there is an asymmetry here. We're doing good at outward foreign direct investment, but not so good in inward foreign direct investment. I don't think we need to talk much about immigration, but the share of foreign population in total population is very limited in Japan. There are some other countries in OECD which has a lower share, but compared to other countries, we have a very low portion of immigration taking place in Japan. So, all in all, I think we are good at outward globalization, but not so good at inward globalization. I think this is one of the reasons why we don't have so much of a inequality compared to the US, for instance. Okay. How about innovation? Innovation used to be done very well in Japan. The notion of national innovation system was first introduced by Professor Christopher Freeman of Sussex University. And the book title is Technology Policy and Economic Performance. But its subtitle is Lessons from Japan. He found the system in Japan was very encouraging to innovation. And he studied a lot in the Japanese innovation system and tried to draw lessons to other countries. Okay. He looked at it as a system, so he looked into how the inputs are coming to the research and development activities. Input means the R&D investment and researchers, supplier researchers. And he also looked into the output, which is patents, for instance, or good quality papers, science papers, or something like that. Okay. So he said that we need to look at it as a system. But anyway, we used to do very well. Okay. But not so much recently. This is the R&D expenditure as a total for the economy in trillion years. You can see that the red dotted lines is for Japan. But it was doing very well until, 2000, and it stayed flat since then. Okay? And we have been overtaken by many other countries, especially China. Okay? And I think it will be taken over by other countries as well. How about the number of researchers? Number of researchers also has stayed flat. Okay. And so, well, the magnitude of the number of researchers may not be so important because the population is different. For instance, China has a big population, so that it may be natural to have a greater number of researchers compared to Japan. But what I want to show you is that in the case of Japan, it has stayed flat. It hasn't grown. And I think it's natural because the population is shrinking. Okay? If you have a population shrinking, I think it's very hard to think that only the scientists and engineers are growing. Okay? So this is the situation. Now, how about the output? Well, I'm afraid the number of top 1% well-cited papers, okay, it means high-quality papers, by Japanese authors have peaked out in the late 2010s and hasn't grown. Okay? It's in the red dotted line, but maybe it's very hard for you to see, but that's the situation. Now, this is about in which area we have strength in patents. This is for Japan. You can see that we have a high share of patents in electrical engineering, general machinery, and mechanical engineering, and transportation equipment. We are good at automobiles. So, okay, this is the situation. How about US? It's very different. They have a very strong power in bio and medical equipment, and biotechnology and pharmaceuticals. And these are the areas which is at the frontier of technology. Okay? And so I'm afraid we are good at the traditional industries in terms of output. But we haven't quite caught up with the changes taking place in the technological change. And we are lagging behind, especially to the United States. Now, why is the reason? I think one of the important factor that we have to bear in mind is that in these areas, bio and pharmaceuticals, I think they owe a lot in startups. I'm afraid startups in Japan is very limited. Okay, if you look at the opening rate, which is shown in the left-hand side, again, Japan is shown in the red dotted line, but we have a very low opening rate, okay, which means that there isn't enough startups coming out. In other countries, we have a lot of higher opening rate, okay, which means that there are more startups coming in. But I'm afraid that is not the case in Japan. By the way, the closing rate is very low as well, compared to other countries. So not much entry into the business and not much exit from the business.
Yeah, right.
The new entrants usually have a high productivity, and those who exit has a low productivity. But if startup is not enough, it means that there's not high productivity firms coming in. And if you think that, if you see that the closing rate is low, it means that low productivity firms will not exit, which brings down the average productivity. So this is the situation. So I'm afraid technology change, in the area of technological change, I think we may have been good at it, but not so much in the recent years. One of the reasons why we don't have enough startups may be related to economic system, especially the employment system and the financial system that we have in Japan. Okay. About the decline in, or the stalemate in terms of inputs to R&D, it may be because of the aging and shrinking of the population. The economy is not growing, and the number of population is not growing. So that you can't invest, you can't keep on investing in R&D. You can't have more scientists and engineers coming into to engage in innovation. So next, I'll turn on to what's the problem with the economic system. Why hasn't economic system changed in order to be able to produce more startups which would engage in product innovation? Now, there's a lot of things I want to talk about, but because of the time, I have to be brief. But the economic system also used to be very good in 1950s and 1970s. That's when the current economic system was established. So I name it as high growth period type of economic system. Now, one of the important areas is employment system. And we have a very special employment system here. We have a lifetime employment system, seniority-based wage system, and in-house training system. They are all related to each other. They complement each other. So there's a reason why we have these three as a set. But I want to explain so much on this. I'm afraid it used to work well, especially in the high growth period, but it's not doing so well. And it's gradually changing. For instance, this is a share of non-regular workers and regular workers. Regular workers means that those who are covered by lifetime employment, and non-regular workers means that those who are not covered by lifetime employment, meaning part-time workers, fixed-term workers, dispatched workers, and other non-regular workers. And the share of non-regular workers is increasing. So we are becoming increasingly less lifetime employment system. Okay. Now, this is the wage profile. This shows how wages evolve as you get older. Okay. And seniority-based wage system means that as you get older, the wages are going to get high. But you can see that the red line, this is the most recent one. Okay, this is for 2019. I tried to use 2019 because the number of the data for 2020 may have been available, but I don't want it to be affected by COVID-19. So I avoided the data for 2020 or 2021. I stuck to 2019. But anyway, it means that the wage profile is becoming flatter. So seniority-based wage system is becoming weaker and weaker. Now, this is the portion of in-house training taking place in firms. The solid lines are for regular workers, and dotted lines are for, the blue lines are for the regular workers, and the red lines are for non-regular workers. You may see not much of a change here, but you can see that non-regular workers receive less training compared to regular workers, okay? Because non-regular workers would change jobs, and the firms would not see a benefit in training these workers who move to other companies. So they try to concentrate training to the regular workers. Now, if you see this together with the increasing share of non-regular workers, it means that the greater share of workers are receiving less training. Okay? I'm not quite sure that is a good thing for the labor force. Okay, so these are the changes taking place, and it's becoming less and less inefficient, I'm afraid. Okay? Why is it? Well, I think number of reasons, but one is the aging and shrinking of the population. Because of that, the workforce is aging. And if workforce is aging, under the seniority-based wage system, you have to pay more, and the firms is increasing its labor cost. But also at the same time, there's intensifying competition with emerging and developing economies. We are not competing with developed economies, but we're competing with developing economies. So there's a pressure to reduce production cost. It's not very difficult to compete in quality. We have to compete in prices. So these are putting pressure on the employment system, and it forces changes to the system. Okay? Ideally, we should reform the unemployment system to match this new underlying conditions, but we haven't done it so far. So it's adapting gradually, partially, which creates a lot of inefficiency. Also, relating to the startup issue, why is the economic system a problem for having more startups? Well, because if you have a lifetime employment system, it's very risky for a person to get off the mainstream and engage in startups. Okay? And it's because it's very hard to get back to the mainstream and get a good job in a large company, which usually is the ideal for the young people. Also, because of financial system where we don't have so much risky money, or risk money, I'm afraid not much venture capital is going into the startups. Okay. The problem in the employment system is related to the lack of startups that I talked about earlier. Okay, so aging and shrinking was behind a lot of problems. So I want to look at the aging and the shrinking population issue very quickly. But this is the figure which shows the most recent projection done by the National Institute. The peak was in 2008, and population has been declining. And the starting point of this projection is 2020. But at the time of 2020, the population was 126.1 million. Projection expects the population at 2070, that's 50 years from now, to be 87.0 million, which is about minus 30%. Okay. In 100 years' time, it will be 49.7 million, about minus 60%. So in 100 years' time, if you're still alive, you see less than half of the people around you compared to what we see now. This pace of the reduction in population is about 0.9% per year, okay, if you take the average for the 100 years. If you do a very simple extrapolation of this, you find that in 1900 years' time, the population of Japan is going to be 2. Okay. Now, this is where you should laugh, but anyway. But it's a joke, but it's also, this question is very serious because, okay, you don't want to see population going down to 2. Okay? But what would stop that shrinking of the population? Nobody has come up with a good idea. Then we would expect the population to be 2. Okay, so I think we need to be serious about this. Okay, now, in connection to the issue that I'm talking about, the economic implication is very important. And one of the important implications is that it's going to reduce the potential GDP growth rate. It's already very low. It's about 0.5%. So in the medium term, we can grow only about 0.5% in Japan. But because of the aging and shrinking of the population, there will not be enough workers. Aging would supply less savings, which should go to investment. So it's going to be a constraint on investment. And then in aged people, aged scientists and aged engineers, I'm afraid may not be good at innovation. But before that, if you have a shrinking population, as I talked about, there will be less number of scientists and engineers. And a lot of innovation depends on the supply of the engineers. Okay? The endogenous growth theory in economics explains the supply of the innovation with the absolute number of scientists and engineers, the researchers. Okay? This is how it is modeled. It means that the absolute amount of researchers is very important, but under a declining population, I'm not so sure we would have enough labor input to innovation. So I think we would see a decline in potential GDP growth rate further, and it may fall into negative field. Okay. Some would say, well, it's not a problem, because if it's growing in per capita terms, well, the living standard is improving. Or some would say that because of the global warming problem issue, we should not grow. Okay? We should stop growing. Okay? These are the discussions. And I think we have to think seriously about this, whether we need to grow or not. But I'll talk with the assumption that we need to grow. And the reason why I think we need to grow is a number of things. Number of firms and variety of products will be constrained if we don't have a growing market. Especially in Japan, the social security system cannot be sustained without growing GDP. And fiscal situation, which we have a very high government debt compared to GDP. But we won't be able to control this if we don't grow. So I'll talk on the assumption that we need to grow. But maybe you have a different idea. Now, I don't have time to talk about how we should deal with the aging and shrinking of the population. There are a number of things that you can think about as I summarized in this slide. But I will say that as I continue to say is that promoting, this is working on the white job, promoting promoting innovation. I think we can't rely on this because of the shrinking population. So it's a risky solution. We can raise labor force participation rate because we have M-shaped curve, which is famous for the shape of the females' labor force participation rate, and we have to raise it so that the female workers can work more as they want. But also we can reform the economic system and promote globalization. These are the things that we can do. But these are not the final solution because there's a limit to what we can do. Raising labor force participation rate, there's a limit. The limit is 100% of participation rate. Okay? It's an extreme argument, but I want to show you that this is not the final solution. So the final solution may be raising total fertility rate, but this is going to be very important, difficult, and also it's a super long solution because even if you succeed in raising fertility rate to 2.1 from next year, the shrinking of the population will just not stop because there's an inertia in population. So next 70 years or so, you keep on witnessing or facing a decline in population, even if you have a fertility rate of 2.1. So what can you do? I think we need to accept more foreign workers. This is very controversial in Japan, but I think we need to do that. Because I once talked about the shrinking and aging of the population issue in the United States, in CSIS. Anyway, I talked about it. And then in the Q&A session, an American lady made a comment on the question. And she said that, well, I understand what you said, and I see that the Japanese economy is facing a very serious problem. But for her, the solution is simple. Okay? Why not accept more foreign workers? I anticipated that because I'm talking in US, and it was before Trump, so that was a natural reaction. But I was kind of startled by what she said after that. She said that Japan should know better because Japan has been sending immigrants abroad. Why don't you accept more immigrants? You have been sending people abroad. Why don't you have more coming in? So kind of a double standard on immigration policy, I think, was raised at that time. But anyway, I think I should move on. So I think we need to grow, okay? So that's my conclusion. But then if Japan is to grow, I think we need to promote more globalization and innovation, okay? Among others. But as I said earlier on, wouldn't globalization and innovation widen inequality? Okay? What can we do? We want grow. We want to grow. But then we have to accept wider inequality. Something like what is taking place in the United States. Or is there any other way? I think the Nordic economists give us a clue. Okay? This is the ranking of globalization and innovation. You can see that the Nordic economies has a very high ranking in terms of both globalization and innovation. Okay? So, okay, they're doing very well. And this is something that Japan will like to do as well. But as we saw earlier on, they have a low inequality. How can that be possible? Well, it's possible because they have a large government or because they have a welfare state. Okay, this is the general government expenditure of Nordic economies and other economies in terms of its ratio to GDP. Okay, you can see that Nordic economies has a very high ratio to GDP of its general government expenditure. They spend quite a lot. Okay. Oh, large government means spending a lot. Okay, but it's not only about the size of the expenditure. It's also the composition of the expenditure. I just want you to look at the far left-hand side. This is the spending, the share of spending which goes to social protection. Sweden is a representative of Nordic economies in this figure, but you can see that Sweden spends a lot in social protection. Okay. Now, another aspect of a welfare state, or large government, is its involvement with the labor market. This is labor union density. Nordic economies has a very high labor union density. The membership of the labor unions is very high. This is the employment protection index. Nordic economies tend to protect strongly their employment. Maybe except Denmark, okay, which is another interesting exception. I talked about Finland earlier, but this is Denmark. Doesn't so much protect their workers compared to other Nordic economies. Okay? But generally speaking, the Nordic economies protect employment a lot. And this is spending in training. The Nordic economy spends a lot in training of workers, and especially Denmark. Okay. So this brings to the central concept that I wanted to introduce in this book. It's the growth, equity, small government, impossible triangle. As I suggested, I think there are three policy objectives that is considered to be desirable: growth, equity, and having small government. Okay. US and Japan tend to have a small government. Maybe I didn't quite show you, but okay, compared to the Nordic economies, Japan and US has a limited spending of government. By the government. Okay. So these are, well, resources should be used in the private sector, not in public sector. That's one idea, so that small government may be considered as something desirable. So there are three desirable objectives. But I guess after having gone through all this data and discussion, I think what we can do is we can only achieve two of the three. And we have to surrender one. And this is what I call the impossible triangle. You can say that if you know international economics, there's an impossible trinity theorem. Okay. There you say that there are three objectives, but you can only achieve two. But it's similar to that. But I call it impossible triangle. But it's something like this. We have globalization, innovation, which is something desirable, egalitarian society, which is again desirable, and small government. We want to have that. Okay? But we can't achieve all three, I'm afraid. So, US has chosen globalization, innovation, and small government, and sacrificed egalitarian society. That's why they have a high inequality. Nordic economies, they have chosen to have globalization, innovation, as I showed you earlier, and they kept low inequality. But they surrendered small government. They have a large government with a welfare government. Japan. So far, what we have done is we tried to have a low inequality, but we also wanted small government. So we sacrificed globalization and innovation. This is what I talked about earlier. Okay? We weren't equally globalized or equally innovative as in other countries. It's because we chose not to. We chose to be an egalitarian society with a small government. Okay, now, facing that choice, what should Japan do? We need to grow, as I said. We need to grow. Which should we choose, egalitarian society or small government? Which should we sacrifice, egalitarian society or small government? Okay. I think we need to choose in egalitarian society. We need to keep inequality low. And so we need to sacrifice small government. The reason? It's because we are risk averse. Japanese people are known to be risk averse. If there's a high inequality, if you don't succeed, there's a risk of becoming poor. Okay? But if you're risk averse, you don't want that. Okay? So you try to have more equality rather than high inequality. This is one kind of evidence for that. This is the composition of household financial assets. Okay? Japan, United States, and the Eurozone. Sorry. Okay. And the red part, which I would like you to concentrate, is the currency and deposits. Okay. More than half of the financial assets held by households are in currency and deposits. It's bank deposits. United States, it's quite different. In the United States, you have equities, you have investment trust. Okay. You take more risk. Eurozone is about in the middle. But I'm afraid Japan has a very high asset in deposit, in the form of deposit, which shows, I think, it's because we are risk averse. And if you're risk averse, I think we should choose equality and not sacrifice it. Okay, so this is, I think, is the way to move towards the Nordic economies. Okay. Of course, I'm not saying that we should imitate Nordic economies. And I think it's very hard to imitate Nordic economies because they're not the same. If you look into the details, there's so much difference. I suggested, when I talked about Finland, when I talked about Denmark, but there are other differences among the economies. So it's not easy to imitate. Which one are you talking about? And also the Nordic economies are also facing challenges because their population is aging and shrinking as well. And they are globalized. And their employment system is also changing. So there are a lot of people who are left out from the labor unions, and their labor union density is coming down very gradually. So I think we need to study, and we need to learn from the Nordic experience, but we need to be more innovative in creating a new welfare state of our own. Okay, these are the things that I would list as the elements of a flexible and resilient welfare state. This is the name I gave to the Japanese system, which we should pursue. Promote inward globalization, promote product innovation, reform labor market, introduce flexicurity. This is the system in Denmark. They don't protect workers. So firms find it very easy to fire people. But they are subject to very high unemployment benefit, and they receive a lot of training so that they can go back to the labor market. And this is called the flexicurity, flexibility and security. And I think this is a very interesting idea. And so I think we need to introduce flexicurity. Also, I think we need to strengthen collective bargaining to promote internal income redistribution. This is my naming. But in the Nordic economies, as a result of the collective bargaining process, with a very high labor union membership, they come up with a wage increase, which tends to put a ceiling to the high wage earners and raise the wages received by low wage earners. This brings the wage differential to a small one compared to something without such an arrangement. And so I call it this an internal income redistribution. This is a Lane-Meitner model, which is famous. This is the model created by or suggested by the economists in the labor union in Sweden. But anyway, this is a kind of a way that has brought the very low inequality, even in the market income, I told you at the outset. Okay. Even without income redistribution, in Nordic economies, they don't have high inequality because they're engaging in internal income redistribution. Reforming public spending on taxation, more spending on families. Education is almost free, even after compulsory education in the Nordic economies. A lot of benefit goes to the families, to the incapacity people, unemployment benefit, and old age pension. And so through this, we should strengthen the external income redistribution. Okay, this is the usual income redistribution we talk about. Okay, finally, I think I used up so much of the time, but what should Japan do from here? There's many things that we have to think about. So it's going to take a long time to come up with a single policy recommendation. But suppose we came up with a good idea. We still face an obstacle. And it's because we are aged society. And in Japan, and maybe similar in other countries as well, but the voting rate rises with age. And it's the aged people who engages in voting compared to the young people. Young people do not go to elections, I'm afraid. Okay. So the voting rate rises with age. If you think that the aged people would not want to have their life disturbed, we'll try to avoid a big change or big reform in society. Okay, this is called the silver democracy in Japan. But because of this silver democracy, maybe the aged people would try to put a stop to any drastic changes to the system. And so this may be the final obstacles that we face. Still, in 2070, we still have the share of the young people, if you define young people as those between 18 and 64, the share of young people compared to the aged who are more than 65 years old, the share of young people is going to be more than the aged people. So if you can persuade the young people to go to election and support this reform, we still have some possibility that the idea may go through. But in order to do that, I think people need to be rational and long-sighted because, for instance, aging and shrinking population affects economy and society very gradually. It's not a drastic change. So you have to be rational and long-sighted to acknowledge the problem. Younger generation needs to be persuaded that participation in elections by voting is effective in changing policies to their interest. In turn, policymakers need to explain clearly what they are aiming to achieve and their significance for the future of the Japanese economy and the society. I think Japan needs to make the move forward towards this direction if it wants to see a brighter future of the Japanese economy and society. I don't think there's any other choice. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Saito Sensei. Do I need to use the mic? You're good. Yep, I'm good. Okay. Thank you very much. It was a very thorough presentation. Covered many
Sorry,
aspects.
it took so much time.
No, that's good. I have lots of questions, but I don't want to monopolize quick, so I will just ask two short questions. First, in order to deal with the civil democracy issue, which is not only a problem for Japan, but for a lot of societies, should we politically euthanize the elderly? That is, in other words, should we remove the right to vote after a certain age, or should we give 2 votes to the younger people? I'm talking about political sensation. I'm not advocating solely agree. Hello.
Okay, you want to answer,
Yes.
maybe to reply to that? Okay, there's idea of that kind floating, I know, and but maybe you can also allow the aged people to delegate its voting rights to the young people, their sons, daughters, or maybe the grandchildren, maybe. That may be another possibility, okay? But all this is against democracy, I think. They have a right to vote. They have a right to vote, and so I think that path is not possible, I don't think.
So we could that's an interesting idea. So the elderly could say, look, I'm X, and so I'm giving my daughter the right to vote the way that I can give my daughter my house. And just, that's an interesting concept. The other one is a technical one. You have the percentage of FDI relative to GDP. Now, I would assume, and tell me if I'm wrong, but all other things being equal, FDI is higher the smaller the country. Because if you take, say, Luxembourg, if you have someone who invests who's 50 kilometers away, that's an investor that's from a foreign country. If you're in Kansas, you could drive for days or weeks and still be in the US. So if you adjust for countryside, for the size of the country, you're still getting very different levels of FDI?
I'm not quite sure about that because if the country is small, you don't need to invest.
No, but okay. Yeah.
So I don't think the size of the economy is so much important in terms of how much foreign direct investment you are able to attract. I think what it may be more important is the need to finance your current account. If you have a big current account deficit, you need to finance it by more investment coming from abroad. Maybe, and then if whether you have a current account deficit or not depends on the demographics. You know, if you have more aged people, you would have lower savings. So you may need to attract more savings from abroad. So demographics and related to that, the current account situation may be important.
Good. So we have questions. If you can identify yourselves, okay? So no, yeah.
Thank you so much I was actually a former student of Professor Saito. Thank you so much. And he was my thesis advisor, actually.
And you're a startup, you're engaging startup.
Yes. I was really interested about, for example, all of the reform of public spending. And here I'm really interested because, for example, 5 years ago, when Aso was talking about the amount of money that we lack in, let's say, pensions and so on, he said about on average, you'll need about 20 million Japanese yen. There is a big deficit in order to be able to keep financing the elderly population with all of the pensions. And I think with increasing the elderly population, that will continue to increase. How do you think that will impact it? Because when that was, said, I was personally there at the demonstration as well, and there's a lot of people participating because no one has 20 million Japanese yen, right now. The majority doesn't have that much money to saved up, but that was sort of the measurement that was given. And how do you think, and with this, reverse triangle that Japan is, what do you think the future holds?
Yes, especially the elderly have high financial assets, but many of them also have high debt. And so in net assets, many people find it very difficult to have that amount of money. Now, if aged people increases in its share in the economy, there'll be less savings. And as I just mentioned, there'll be more possibility of an economy getting into current account deficit. Now, interesting enough, even though we are aging, we still have a current account surplus in Japan. And you may wonder why, okay? But one reason is that, well, if the savings come down, if the investment stays flat, then you may engage in current account deficit. But in Japan, what happens is that investment is coming down as well. So the difference will not change. And this is one of the problems. And it shows that we are not good at attracting foreign investment from abroad. Okay? If we lack savings domestically, if you are able to attract savings from abroad, you'll be able to finance investment in Japan. But as the very low inward foreign direct investment shows, we are not good at attracting savings. So what happens is that if we have lower savings, domestic savings, investment goes down. It's a very strange situation, but that is what the data tells us. And so I think, the financing social security system, I think we have to think a lot about this. But one is that we need to think of a way that there'll be an increase in benefit in pensions, the healthcare system, and long-term care system. But we need to finance that. And so one is to kind of control benefit, for instance. We already have what we call a macroeconomic slide system, which automatically cuts the benefit according to the decline in the number of pension premium payers and also the increase in the benefit receivers. This is, we got the idea from Sweden, but this is what we have in the pension. But we don't have something, so this enables us to control the pension system because it automatically cuts the benefit if we find it difficult to finance it. But healthcare and long-term care, we don't have such a system. So we need to think of a way to control these. There's a lot of issues that we need to discuss if you start talking about social security system, but I think I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Soren?
Hi, Soren Dixon. I'm student president here at TUJ. So you advocate Japan moving more towards a welfare state, but also in accepting more foreign workers. This sentiment doesn't seem like it would be very widely supported, especially considering the new bill that targets foreigners who aren't paying their taxes, even though foreigners usually pay their taxes better than most Japanese. How much of this issue do you think is, I guess, a cultural issue in Japan and a political issue of, older demographics? And how much does Japan need to change culturally? Or how much of a revolution needs to take place for this economic change to actually follow?
Okay. Your question is about welfare state and immigration. Okay, this is a very important and also a very difficult issue. But to start with, I think I would like to mention that even in the Nordic economies, there's a difference towards policy against immigration. I think in Finland, I think they have very relatively restrictive compared to other countries. Sweden has a big portion of immigration coming in, but Finland not so much. And that may be a problem because they are aging very quickly. I think it's the most aged in among the Nordic economies, and their population is shrinking. So I think they will face a lot of problems. But so even in the welfare state, there's a difference, and it shows that it's a very difficult issue. Now, in Japan, I think the business is for immigration. So business, because they face a lot of labor shortage, they want to have more immigrants coming from abroad, including the unskilled workers. Okay. Generally speaking, I think we assume that people are not so not so agreeable towards immigration. But I'm not quite sure about that. It changes. And I thought, when we are going to have Olympic Games, I think it was a good opportunity because we're going to receive a lot of visitors from abroad. That enables the people, not only in Tokyo, but in other places as well, to meet foreigners. And, they'll know that, foreigners is not a stranger. They are same human beings, and you can do well with them. But because of COVID-19, the Olympic Games in Tokyo was not that successful in that respect. But we are receiving more foreign visitors. I think it's a good opportunity for us to see to allow people to meet foreigners. Okay. It's not only about foreigners. It's also about, when I talked about Olympics, it's not Olympics, but it's also Paralympics. It's about the disabled. It's about diversity. I think we need more diversity. Okay, and also, the females' participation in society is very limited. We have to deal with that. So all these diversity issue is here in Japan. But I think, there's an opportunity that would enable us to think about how we can deal with the diversity and improve in those aspects. So there are difficulties, but I think there is a way to go through that. And the government policy is changing little by little. Okay? They have introduced a new status of residence, which allowed relatively relatively less skilled workers to coming into Japan. Okay? And so it's changing gradually. Okay? And so I think, there is a hope, and I think there is a way, but I know that it's not an easy issue.
Let me follow up on Sean's question. Is if you look at immigration supply-demand issue, if you take the UK, the other large state on the coast of Eurasia, there are literally billions of people who can land in Britain, already know English, have a certain familiarity with the way things are done in the West here. When I'm bringing migrants to Japan, okay, very unskilled work, maybe they don't need to know a lot, even though it's until automated translation makes progress, you do need to have some language ability. And then work in IT, yes, you can bring IT professionals who don't know anything about Japan. You put them in a room, you have 1 or 2 Japanese, you serve as liaison with the rest of the corporation. But most jobs here require not only that you know Japanese, but that you have some familiarity with the way things work here. So my question is, where are we going to get the supply of individuals who can land on Sunday and take a job on Monday, which in the UK, my only issue is regulation, is does the UK government allow me to give them work visas? But once that's solved, I can find literally billions of people in Europe, in North America, in Asia,
Right.
can do it.
Right. Okay. That's an interesting issue. First of all, I think maybe there may be a less need for immigration if you think about the advancement of telecommunication and information technology, so that you can basically work online. Okay. Well, not in terms of manufacturing sector, but in services sector, that maybe that kind of thing is taking place. So there's a it's not as it was in the past, but there is still a need for in the domestic sector to have more people from abroad because we don't have enough Japanese. Now, you talk about supply of immigration. Yes, it may take time, but we may decide to open up our country more to immigration. But one of the things I'm concerned with is that when we decided to open up our country, nobody may come. And that is because we accept mainly people from Asia, okay? A lot of Vietnam, Nepal, in addition to China, Korea, and others. But these economies, especially in the Asia, they're all aging, and also they're all shrinking in terms of population. They may not be able to supply immigrants to Japan. They need it in their own country. So, I think the immigrants coming into Japan would gradually change from those from Asia to other regions like, South Asia and Africa. Okay, so we need to prepare for that kind of change, because we think that Asians, it's a very, but more or less similar. But we may find there more difference. Okay, so. I think the real difficulty may come after we decide to accept more immigration. How can they enjoy staying in Japan, and how the Japanese would be ready to accept the immigrants. So yes, so I think it's not only about the demand side, but it's also we need to think about the supply side of immigration, if you think about immigration policy.
Thank you. Byron? Yeah.
Byron Siegel. Very interesting talk. I got a lot of questions. I'll try to limit them. One is a technical question about globalization. For Finland, are you including Finland, for example, if we pick Finland, if Finland trades with Sweden, is that global trade because it's an export?
Oh yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So you're not excluding intra-EU trade?
No.
Well, you could do that in the United States if Nebraska trades with California.
Oh.
That's about the same. Why is that's not global?
No.
But Finland and Sweden trading is global, and that seems a little bit of a paradox to me. I mean, the intra-EU trade is basically just one block. It's not globalization in a sense.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'd like your view on that. The other is, I used to be in healthcare, and I saw your statistics about healthcare, and it had the United States and the Nordics and Japan spending quite a lot of money on healthcare. One of the reasons the Americans spend so much is because we're exceedingly inefficient. There's so much waste in the U.S. healthcare system.
Yeah.
And people are not getting coverage, and people are dying, and average life expectancies are going down. But the graph looks like we're doing really well because we spent a lot of money. But it's deceptive, I think.
Right.
And that's linked to the other about innovation in the United States. The reason there's so much productivity in bio in the United States is free pricing. Companies can charge whatever they want for drugs. They make billions of dollars, and people don't get access to medicines. Yeah, and so is that a good, the U.S. model for promoting biotech? I wouldn't recommend that to anybody. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So you're talking about the way that a technological change takes place. I don't think you're denying that progress in technology
Progress.
Yeah. Okay. So, but it's
It's based on the exploitation.
okay. So you're talking about the way that the innovation is taking place. Okay. A lot of interesting issues that you have raised. Okay. First of all, what's the difference between a trade between Sweden and Finland and the trade between California and Arizona, for instance? I'm not quite sure. Okay, that's interesting. But first of all, it's because of the data that it's available. But also, I think, one thing that it came to my mind is the theory of optimum currency area. We can have a single currency or fixed exchange rate system if we have optimum currency area. And according to the studies done by economists earlier on, says that, well, in the case of US, it's an optimum currency area, which means that the economy are very similar and not so much of a difference. I know that if you start thinking about difference, there are differences, but relatively speaking, especially the mobility of people, the mobility of the capital, the mobility of production inputs, I think it's quite smooth, so that you can say that it's the optimum currency area. Whereas the EU,
Eurozone.
oh, the Eurozone, may not be the case. I haven't seen a study in the recent years, but what I saw before is that the optimum currency area exists between Germany, Austria, and somewhere around that, but not with others like Greece or maybe other Spain. So there is a difference, even though you are in the Eurozone. Okay, so I think. Well, I would say that the Nordic economies are quite similar relative to the difference between Germany and Greece, for instance. But I think I think you need to think about the difference that comes up if you think about those theories. You talked about the incentives to innovation. That is very interesting, and I think it's also important. Tony Atkinson, who is a British economist who died, but he made a lot of studies in inequality issue. He wrote a book about how we should deal with inequality. But one of the interesting things that he said is that we should control innovation so that it would lead to less inequality. And you can do that by providing sufficient incentives so that if you take, if you give one set of investment, it might lead to increasingly worker substituting technology But if you give it a different incentive, it might produce more jobs, which also provides decent jobs. And so I think the way that the innovation takes place depends on the incentive you give, and incentive can be controlled by the government. So that we need to take that into perspective. I think that is a very important issue. We think that technology progress takes place because of of the curiosity of the scientists, and they want to do everything they want. But it does depend on the incentives.
The United States dark and with so much the amount of defense department spending.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. From GPS. Yeah, I think that's actually something. It's interesting when you read about innovation. I said this I think before, so sorry if I'm repeating myself. The idea that the Silicon Valley model shows that liberalism works, which is actually freedom to hire, freedom to fire, freedom to borrow, freedom to go bankrupt, freedom to emigrate. But there's also a big government side, which is since 1940, this wall of money that has come into American industry through R&D. I mean, if you look at the budgets of American universities, if you take out the Pentagon, you're going in very bad shape. If you look at all scholarships for everything, if you look at direct subsidies, so there's this, and of course the demand that you get from the Pentagon. So Silicon Valley really shows you need liberalism and you need vast amounts of government support. I mean, otherwise you're not going to have it. Elon Musk, everybody. I mean, Musk owes his wealth to the American taxpayer. We'll have a few. So who has a question? Kashiwagi-sensei and Dan, did you have a question? So why don't you both ask your questions and we'll take them together. And I had Tom too.
Okay, thank you very much. Kashiwagi is my name. I'm a semi-retired person, but an old friend of Saito Sensei. Thank you for your very interesting proposal for Japan to move from a small government country to a large government country. My simple question is, do you think the Japanese people will be willing to pay taxes, higher taxes, to finance this large government? I wish you had the chart of tax to GDP ratio for the Nordic countries, which are very high rate. And I really wonder whether Japanese people will be willing to do that.
Yeah.
My observation is that in the UK it was Thatcher that first that triggered the boom in the City of London in financial and legal services, and then immigration came. I would suggest that you need growth first, then immigration will follow. I don't see any growth in Japan, and I don't think immigration is going to follow. I think the high-skilled visa has been a complete failure. I have a Chinese friend who's a blue-collar guy. He works in a restaurant. He says there's no point living in Japan. You can earn 3 times as much in Australia. So I think to rely on immigration as a silver bullet is not going to work.
Tom, you had a question? Yes. I think you need a mic because this is recorded. It's like the Nixon White House.
Thank you very much. I'm Tom Drees. I'm a former banking and securities lawyer and general counsel here right now. A couple of quick questions and observations. So, one of your key points was that you think Japan needs to globalize inbound and increase competition and innovation, but your stark data shows Japan is at extremely low levels of market entrance and exit. So how do you change those things you haven't proposed a policy agenda that addresses how do you increase domestic inbound innovation and competition when clearly, the current economic system, represses innovation. And then with respect to I'm not sure that you can change the system. I don't see a dynamic by which you get young people, competing or pushing back against the older generation to change the system, which now is quite stable, and which their vote is very, low and not convincing, right? So young people are outweighed by by older generation, and that the increasing, you look at the demographics and what's increasing, certainly not the young, it's the elderly continually increasing. And while you say you want to move to a flexible system that would allow, essentially say corporations can fire and we will help people move around, that's heavily introducing a lot of turmoil in job markets, whereas what we're really seeing the government trying to do is to decrease flexibility in job markets right now by saying to corporations is you now have to start collecting pension and other kind of social welfare insurance payments by, treating more and more people like they're full-time workers, like they're permanent workers. So instead of saying we want to in order to increase flexibility, we're going to get rid of permanent workers or seishai, and we're going to treat everybody else. Instead, the tendency right now is to treat everybody like they're seishai more and more. So on a conference call I was on earlier today, I understand that the Japanese government, just a couple of years down the road, is going to say, if you're hiring somebody for more than 10 hours a week, you have to treat them like they're a full-time worker in terms of collecting some kind of unemployment benefits. But next will be medical and pension benefits.
Okay.
So the trends are just totally in the opposite direction and tending to get worse.
Thank you. So you don't have to answer all the questions.
Well, I think I want to, but I don't think I have enough time. But there are a lot of interesting questions raised, and I think I would like to pick as much as possible. First, about the willingness to pay high taxes. In the current situation in Japan, I think many people would resist paying high taxes. We have been finding difficulty in raising consumption tax. First of all, it was very difficult to introduce a consumption tax, and it was very difficult to raise consumption tax. And usually we think that we need to sacrifice one cabinet or the one administration in order to succeed in raising taxes. Once, when I was in ICU, I invited a ex-foreign minister from Finland to talk in the ICU. He talked about the reforms that he done in Finland. Now I asked, okay, your VAT, which corresponds to the consumption tax rate in Japan, consumption tax in Japan, is 24.5%, which is very high. Okay. My question is, were there any resistance or opposition against raising taxes to that high level? What it says is like this. He is a politician, so we have to take that into account. But what it says is that people would not resist paying higher taxes because they know that they will receive more benefits as a result of increasing taxes. Okay. It's about reliability of the government, I think. I'm not quite sure whether that exists in Japan, but if we need to move on to the welfare state, I think we certainly need more reliability. Okay. Yes, so that is something that I wanted to say. There was something else that I need to say. But anyway, so that's my answer to your question. Now about immigration, even though we open up our country, immigrants may not come because they won't make money in Japan. Okay, recently that is certainly the case because of the steep depreciation of the yen. Okay, even though if they earn in yen, if they try to ship that money to their homeland, it would find less money in their own currency. But also, yes, we need to have jobs for the immigrants to do. And so, yes, that's the reason why I think we need to grow. Okay? And when we need to grow with high globalization and high technological change, it means that we have to grow in the highly valued added sector, which should enable us to pay higher wages to the immigrants. But it's not only about those. We also need less skilled, and so who may be paid less in the area of long-term care, for instance, and those the services sector, which are not so well, what's the word? Attractive, but we don't have enough Japanese to do. Okay, so we need some people to do. And if there's a lack of money, and if the system becomes inflexible, I think they have to pay higher wages in order to attract people. So I think the demand will be there, and so we need to make decisions very quickly in order to have more immigrants coming in. If it becomes very difficult. Okay. Now about low exit rate and low opening rate. One of the reasons why this takes place is because we protect SMEs. Okay. A lot of protection goes to SMEs. We try not to have them go out of business. Okay, but I think keeping in business, even if they're not making profit, is not a good idea. What we should do is make them able to change jobs, so that they can earn more, and not stay in the unprofitable business. So I think we need to review or reform the SME protection policy that we have in Japan. Okay. Okay. About startups, I think I mentioned about that, but we need to have more startups, and in order to have more startups, I think we need to allow more young people to challenge in startups, and which would be made possible if we have more higher mobility, and if those who may fail in startups would be appreciated as having learned a lesson, which would enable to do better in the next challenge. So I think this kind of a mindset is also necessary. But basically, changing the employment system and also allowing the changing financial system so that there will be more risk money would be available in Japanese system, which means that there will more money to ask for higher returns by taking higher risk. And so that's a way to allow more startups to come up in Japan. Now, okay. You think that Japanese society is very stable, and so, not only the aged people may find it difficult to see the need of change. Okay, I would say that the current stable situation is a situation where there is a silent crisis taking place. It's a crisis because aging and population is shrinking. But as I said, it's taking place gradually, and things don't change day by day. So if you miss it, I think you won't be able to acknowledge the need to change. But the crisis is moving along. So again, that's why I said we need to be rational and long-sighted in order to understand what kind of situation we are in. What's the other things that finally, I think if you start talking about difficulties, there are a lot of difficulties. If you start talking about obstacles, there are a lot of obstacles. But as I said at the very end, I don't see any other choice. And so it's a question of whether we're going to pursue that or not. And if we think we need to pursue that, we have to overcome the difficulty. I may not have all the answers to the difficulties that we need to solve, but we have to come up with it. And it's from the collective wisdom of the people. I think we need to come up with that. But I think, what I can say is that there's no other way. Thank you very much.